So I'm sure when we all first started producing, we found it hard to get the right sounds, get the right presets, get our songs sounding professional, sound full and good mixing. We probably all went from getting the demo to FL Studio or another DAW, using the stock presets, the stock sounds, drums, vocals, and tried to make EDM music. We probably made songs like this. Thinking it could be played at Ultra Main Stage or Tomorrowland or EDC. Then you'll go onto SoundCloud or YouTube and you would listen to your favourite DJs and producers' music. For me, it was Hardwell at the time. Then in 2013, Martin Garrix released Animals, and then I found out he was 16 when he produced it, he was 17 when he released it. And it absolutely blew my mind on someone that young could produce something of that high quality. The main thing that opened my eyes was in 2014, I believe, W&W released a song called Rave After Rave. And that just blew my mind on how professional and loud they got that song. It blew my mind. So for this video, I wanted to take the time to show you how you can make something from this to something like this. I'm going to go into intricate details on how to improve your production quality, to make it sound more professional, to get your drums more louder and more sharp, your synths more powerful and big, and to really fill out the drop and make it sound like it could be played on Ultra Main Stage. So without further ado, let's get straight into this. So to start with, we're in the beginner project. Before we get into it, I want to lay down some bullet points on what makes a beginner project, the main characteristics of it. So for number one, it's very minimal sounds. We have 8 layers in total, 4 of them are drums and 4 of them are bass, chords and lead sounds. Number 2 is mixing. The mixing is very minimal. There's no sidechain going on. There's no saturation, compression, delay and reverbs. None of that going on. And most importantly, there's no sidechaining with the sub bass in the kick. So it sounds very, very muddy. It even distorts at certain points of the track because it just gets too loud for the project. Next is the actual overall vibe of the song. It's very happy sounding. Most of the time with EDM, you can make major EDM songs, but the melody utilizes semitones in between notes to get that emotion. It's not always the rule of thumb, but most of the time, big room, progressive house, anything like that, most of the time in minor. Again, it's not a golden rule, but it's most of the time what people do. Next is the drums, very basic sounding drums. They're from FL's native. They're decent, but usually you want good punchy drums with high transients that punch through the mix. And I really want you to take into account how vital good production and drum sounds are. They can really elevate your production by a whole new level. So I'd highly suggest looking into good drums. Even start with Cashmere because Cashmere is goated. And then finally is the effects. Beginners have their effects ridiculously loud. Their sweeps, their impacts, their down sweeps, any sort of white noise effect is very, very loud over the track. So it really just overpowers everything. So we'll quickly go through and play it, go into a bit more detail on why it makes it basic, and then we'll move on to the other project. So to start with, the chords. It's very, very happy sounding. We're utilizing the same note, just duplicated on 3 different octaves, and it just makes it a very basic sounding chord progression. The first thing you can do is to add the relative 7th. So if we go from the root note and go up 7, already we're adding harmonics. Next, you want to add the relative minor or major. So this would be major. This will be minor, A minor. This will be G major, and this will be B minor. Comparing that to before, this is just octaves. Already we have a more fuller sound just by adding more harmonics to the notes and creating triads. Next is the leads. We're using very basic presets. Again, presets is a strong thing. You can start out with presets and you can move more into sound design if you want to get more complex. But again, the melody is very basic. We're just moving up whole tones instead of semitones. So we're going from D to E, from F to G. It's a very happy sounding melody. No sidechain, very weird EQing going on, and they're not even linked to a group to do some bus compression, bus mixing, anything like that going on. It's very, very odd sounding. And then finally, the number 1 no-no rule is no sidechain with your kick. It just sounds way off, it doesn't go at all, and that's the first thing you should learn in music production if you want to make high quality EDM music. You have the classic Prida snare. Everyone used that starting off, and then we have ridiculously loud effects. The effect just overpower everything. It sounds way off. So let's move on to the more professional sounding project. We'll do the same thing with that one, and then we'll go into the more minute details and actually how to elevate your music to the more professional level. So here we are in the professional sounding project. You can see it's way more color coordinated, more organized, way more in depth, way more layers. I've bounced out the leads and the chords into audio to save CPU purposes. So we'll quickly play through the result, and then we'll go through and compare the differences between the beginner and the professional. So straight away you can hear the difference, way more in depth, way more attention to detail. We have the drum fills, we're layering the drum fills, we're layering the drums. There's more layers on chords, bass, drop piano, leads, effects. Everything is way more fine-tuned. We're also doing automation here. We're taking down the master volume by around 2 to 3 dB just before the drop. So when the drop hits, it hits harder. We're doing some mono stereo automation, so it goes more mono. It sounds like it's getting closer into your head, and then when it drops, everything, the drop leads, everything's more wide. And we're also doing a low cut or a high pass cut off automation as well. So the low end is getting taken out. So when all the drums and the sub bass comes in, again, it sounds like the drop hits harder. So let's start with the actual break elements here, the 16 bars here. We have a simple guitar here. If you didn't know, this is the 78910 Dub Vision melody from their 78910 masterclass. The differences you see here, we're using the semitone method like I showed you before. We're using the C and the B. It just adds that emotion to the melody. So yeah, that is that. Then we have just layered it up with a bass guitar. We have simple drums getting filtered in. Automation clips there. We have effects, ambience, impacts. Next we're continuing the layering with the jazz guitar and the dreamy piano. We've also made a unique of the bass guitar to follow the rhythm. And then of course with the drop effects, we have some white noise, impacts, down signs. And then like I said, we have the fills during the drop, just some reverb claps. And then some more attention to detail with the drum fills. Now we're adding claps and rides to complement the kick. Now we move on to the main part, the actual layering up, the leads, the chords, stuff like that. So we'll start at the bottom here with the bass. 5 layers, 4 are gritty layers, more body layers, and the last one is the sub. Next is the drop piano. Next is the drop chords. Just simple 3 layers. And then the main thing, the drop leads. Quite a few layers, we have 5. So to go back to the basic one, we spoke about mixing on point 2. We're taking this to a more professional level. We're giving each lead their own mix channel, and then we're linking it to a bus and doing some group EQ, saturation, compression, everything like that. Another group linking into another one, and we're adding the reverb, and very importantly the sidechain. Got quite a loose sidechain here, so an 80%, but it still does the job. And as you can see by the waveform, we have a much stronger sidechain on the chords and the bass comparing to the waveform. See, it ducks a lot quicker here, so it gets out the way of the punch. If we show in comparison with the kick waveform, you see the punch of the kick here, the chords and the bass are well out of its way. But the drop chords of processing is very similar. We'll give each channel their own mixing channel, and then we'll link it to a group. We're doing something called surgical EQ, where you take out certain frequencies that you don't like, and we're also making space for the drop leads by cutting down to 8 kHz, so there's not as much high end, so it gives more space for the drop leads. Otherwise there'd be too much high end and everything would clash. We're doing the same thing for the bass here. We go to the bass group. You hear the really grittiness into the bass, you take it off. Gives more space for the chords, and then the chords gives more space for the leads. So it all goes hand in hand. If I was to show you what it would sound like without sidechain on the bass, prepare your ears, it's going to sound awful, but this is the kick and bass without sidechain. Not nice at all. So the sidechain is very important. It adds that pumpy feeling, it gives space for the kick. So definitely take into account and learn sidechain. I'm using a plugin called Kickstart by Nicky Romero. He recently released Kickstart 2, but you can use an FL native one called Gross Beat. You can also use Volume Shaper LFO tool if you want to purchase plugins. Yeah, you can also use sidechain compression by using a compressor. I've got a tutorial on that on my channel, you can check that out. So to end this off, I'm going to go through the bullet points and compare the professional to the beginner, and we're going to show what's different, and hopefully you can take away some pointers. So the final part of this video is me going to be comparing the bullet points I made for the beginner project, and we're going to be comparing them to the professional project. So the first bullet point was minimal sounds. So in the first project we had 3 lead layers, a couple chord layers and 1 bass layer, and like 3 or so drums. So the first thing you need to look out for to elevate your music production is layering your sounds, choosing the right layers, and making sure they all fit together. So as I showed before, we had 5 layers for leads, 3 layers for chords, but we also added a piano to add more body to the chords, and then we have like 5 or so layers for the bass. We had 4 gritty layers and a sub bass. But it's not all about picking sounds and all of a sudden you have layered sounds. Definitely look into the sounds you're layering. I recommend picking one sound, that's your main sound, and then layering around that. So my main sound here is lead 5. And it's a lead from Nexus called Progressive Pluck. And we're just layering around that. So then we add another lead. So all 4 of these leads perfectly complement the final lead, which is the main lead. So all the leads aren't clashing together, one doesn't fit with the other. You may have instances where a lead sounds horrible on its own, but it fits really well in the mix. If that's the case, then definitely use it. Whatever sounds good goes. This goes for chords, bass, anything you really want to layer. Definitely look into what you're layering and what sounds you're choosing to layer with, because you will find that if you just choose random sounds, they will sound weird sometimes together. So that all makes one big sound, so it works perfectly together. And again, same with the bass. You hear to add more mid bass to the actual bass sound. And then to end it off with drums, we have a kick. Before it was just a kick and a clap. We had a 4/4 kick, and we had a clap on the 2 and 4 beats. Now we have a much more powerful kick for starters. It has a nice transient, and then we also have claps hitting alongside the kick to add more power. This is pan slightly left. Yep. Another tip I can give you, it's not always the rule, but if you feel like your claps and your rides and stuff are clashing with the transient punch of the kick, you can sidechain the first part of your claps and rides, and it will get that out of the way of the punch, and the kick has more space to breathe and punch. Again, with the fills, we could have just had this one fill, and it could go like this. For me, I want to layer it up, so I'll add another snare. and then a more rhythmic snare to keep the rhythm going. Bear in mind, this isn't an actual final production of mine, this is just a tutorial purpose project. With a real project, you'll take a lot more time to flesh out your sounds. Once you put the time in, you'll get good results. Bullet point 2 was mixing. Again, we went through that at the start. We'll quickly go through it again. The number one rule is sidechain. Next is EQ, surgical EQ, with taking dips out of sounds that are very resonant to the ear to give more space for other sounds to breathe. Each sound in your mix needs space to breathe, it needs space to play. You don't want to overpower the high end, any part of the frequency you don't want to overpower with a load of sound. So you definitely want to give each sound its space to work in the mix. Again, I showed before surgical EQ. The leads were quite sharp around 2000. We done a bit of a dip at the 200 hertz range, and then we done a low cut, and we're doing a load of different EQs. And then the piano had its own one, a very, very specific looking EQ, taking out the high end so it doesn't clash with the other sounds. It's not just drop sounds that need attention to detail mixing. We even have mixing on the drums. So we just have a simple EQ boost in the 9.3k hertz range. This is the clicky part of the kick to add more punch. And then we had a soft clipper to stop it clipping. With an EQ boost in the upper mid range or the mid range. So if we take that off, you'll hear the difference. This adds more power. The last thing I'll show you on mixing is what we've done for the starter sounds here. So for the guitar. Sounds very dry, very centered. We added a chorus, a reverb for space, an OTT, which is a great plugin. It's a free plugin, so definitely grab that. A sound goodizer and another EQ to end off. And you can hear the difference straight away. It gives it a space, it gives it ambience, and it brightens it up massively. And next is a jazz guitar. Just an OTT and other stuff to brighten it up. You hear there's a lot more low end rumble on this one, so we took it out with the EQ, but you hear how bright the sound gets. Just the more you produce, the more you learn. Definitely download FLPs from YouTube and see what EQs and stuff they use. You can even take the sounds and samples they use. It's a great way to start. I did that starting off. That's how I got a bunch of claps and kick sounds. A very great way to start. So bullet point 3, I believe, was the vibe/emotion of the song, the scale and key. There's not much to talk about at this point, but we'll go through it anyway. In the beginner project, we was using whole tones for the whole melody rather than semitones throughout the melody. So it was something like... It was something like that, I believe. We're using full tones rather than semitones in between. So you see this melody, we're using semitones here. It goes high, then it goes back to the semitones again. So if we was to change this to a more major one, it would sound odd. That sounds strange. We can't use C sharp because that's not in the key. Even if we changed it to E, it would sound very weird. It just sounds natural to the ear. There's really not much else to explain it. And the same goes for chords. Before, we were just using the same note across 3 octaves. Here we're using full-on chords, triads. It adds more emotion, adds more harmonics, and it just sounds way better. There's really not much else to explain it. Just take the time to learn music theory, simple triads, minors, majors to start with, and you'll be on your way. Point 4 was drums and drum samples and layering. We sort of went over that at the start with the first point, so we won't go over it again. All I'll say is that the drum samples you use impact massively what your production will sound like in the end product. For example, if I use the FL Native kick for the actual kick drum, and I use the FL Native clap to layer on top, it would sound very strange. So depending on what genre you're making, big room, future house, deep house, all these different subgenres of EDM, definitely take the time to get the right drum samples to fit that genre. You're not going to use this kick drum in a big room or bass house song. It would just sound a bit strange. You want more of a thumpy kick. You wouldn't use a lot of sounds that you use in big room in tech house, for example. Pick and choose and take the time to get the right drum samples to fit that certain subgenre. And finally, to end it off, we were speaking about effects and how they are incredibly loud in the beginner project. But this time we are making sure we get the perfect volume for the effects. We give them all their own mixer slot. we get the volumes right, and the end result just really helps to drop the sound more full. We could even enhance it even more, add another sound. I'll show you exactly what I mean. I'll add one more sound and I'll show you. So I've added this crowd effects from the ANG 78910 pack. We'll play without and we'll play with. Just keeps the energy going, it fills it out a lot more, and I definitely recommend get the white noise, the crowd effects, the ambience in your drop. Get the perfect volumes for that and it will make the drop sound a lot better. The same with risers and sweeps with layered risers. We don't just have one riser, we have multiple. We'll quickly go through them. We're just layering the effects, making it sound bigger, fuller, and an overall more polished product. So that is pretty much it. I hope you learned something. These are the main things I wanted to point out in the production. If you want me to make a follow-up video and be doing this on the spot so I can teach you a bit more, go a bit more in depth, I can definitely do that. Just remember, producing is a skill. It takes a while to learn. It's not something you can learn over a couple months. You need to put a lot of time into this. You've probably heard the saying that 10,000 hours makes you a somewhat professional. So yeah, just remember, time equals talent. Keep working, you'll get there very soon. So I hope you enjoyed. If you learned anything, smash the like button as it really helps the channel grow and I really appreciate it. I've got more templates and more tutorials along the way to help you improve. Keep producing and I'll speak to you all very soon. Have a wonderful day and take care.